The sterile hospital room felt eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos that had landed me here. My name is Emily, and the events leading to my hospitalization had been traumatic, to say the least. I'd suffered a severe car accident, leaving me with a broken leg and a host of other injuries. The pain was excruciating, but I was thankful to be alive. The first night in the hospital passed in a haze of painkillers and fragmented sleep. I was grateful for the peace and quiet, even though the antiseptic smell made my stomach churn. However, that tranquility was short-lived. The next morning, I awoke to a nurse bustling around my room. She was adjusting machines and replacing 4 bags, her expression tense. "Is everything all right?" I asked, my voice hoarse from disuse. The nurse turned to me, her face a mix of concern and sympathy. "We have another patient who needs a room, Emily," she explained. "I'm afraid we'll have to move you to a shared space for now." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment at losing my private room. Pain shot up my leg as I shifted, but I gritted my teeth and allowed the nurse to help me into a wheelchair. She wheeled me down the corridor, past rows of identical rooms, until we arrived at my new shared room. The room was smaller than the one I'd had before, with 2 narrow beds separated by a flimsy curtain. I glanced at the other bed, wondering who my new roommate would be. But I couldn't have anticipated the terror that awaited me. A woman lay in the adjacent bed, her body still and her eyes vacant. She looked to be in her late 30s, with long, matted hair and an ashen complexion. Tubes and wires snaked from her frail form to various machines, monitoring her vitals. As the nurse helped me into my bed, she spoke softly. "This is Sarah. She's been diagnosed with schizophrenia. She might be a bit unpredictable. Just let us know if you need anything." I nodded, trying to be understanding. Mental illness was nothing to be afraid of, I told myself. But as night fell, and the room grew dark save for the dim glow of monitors, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that settled over me. I was awakened from a sleep by a soft, raspy whisper. My eyes flicked open, and I saw Sarah sitting up in her bed, her gaze locked onto me. She was muttering something under her breath, words that I couldn't quite make out. "Sarah?" I called out tentatively, my voice trembling. "Are you okay?" The whispering grew louder, more coherent, and I could finally discern the words. It was a language I didn't recognize, guttural and filled with malice. Fear clenched my heart as Sarah's body contorted in ways that should have been impossible. Her limbs twisted and bent at unnatural angles, her voice now a horrifying shriek that echoed through the room. I reached for the nurse call button, my trembling fingers missing it the first few times. When I finally pressed it, the nurse arrived quickly, her face a mask of concern. But as soon as she entered the room, Sarah's body seemed to relax, her eyes returning to their vacant state. "What happened?" the nurse asked, her eyes darting between us. I tried to explain, but the words stumbled out incoherently. I wasn't even sure if I believed what I had just witnessed. It was as if Sarah had been possessed by some malevolent force. The nurse gave me a skeptical look but reassured me that Sarah's condition was well documented. She left, leaving me alone in the dimly lit room once more. I watched Sarah warily, unable to shake the feeling that something sinister lurked beneath her fragile facade. Later that night, while I was half asleep, the laughter sliced through the silence of the room, eerie and chilling. I bolted awake, my eyes wide with terror, and my gaze landed on Sarah. She was sitting up in her bed, her head thrown back in a grotesque parody of joy as that sinister laugh emanated from her. My heart was pounding. I tried to get out of bed, but my broken leg protested with fiery pain. I could only watch in mounting horror as her laughter reached a crescendo, filling the room with a malevolent presence that seemed to smother the very air. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, the laughter stopped. Sarah's head snapped to me, her blank eyes locked on mine. A chill crawled down my spine as a slow, sinister smile spread across her face. It was a smile devoid of warmth, a smile that sent shivers down my spine. Before I could react, Sarah lunged at me with a speed and strength that defied her frail appearance. Her hands closed around my throat, squeezing with an unnatural force. I gasped for breath as panic clawed at my mind. With a surge of adrenaline, I tried to break free from her grip. But Sarah's grip was unrelenting, her fingers like steel cables as they tightened around my throat. My vision dimmed, and I felt the edges of consciousness slipping away. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, the room was flooded with light as the nurse burst in. With a cry of alarm, she rushed forward and wrenched Sarah away from me. Sarah fought against her, her vacant eyes now filled with a frenzied rage. The struggle was brief but intense, and the nurse managed to subdue Sarah with the help of another nurse who had rushed in. They restrained her in her bed, securing her wrists and ankles with thick straps. I lay gasping for breath, my throat raw and bruised, my mind reeling from the horrifying encounter. Sarah's transformation, her supernatural strength, and that malevolent smile haunted me. I knew that whatever had taken hold of her was something far more sinister than mere schizophrenia. The medical staff called in a psychiatrist, hoping to make sense of the inexplicable events that had unfolded. I was moved to a different room, one as far away from Sarah as possible, but the trauma of that night stayed with me. As I lay in my new room, trying to come to terms with the horrifying truth, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had encountered something beyond the realm of human understanding. Sarah was no longer just a patient suffering from mental illness, she had become a vessel for something ancient and malevolent, a force that defied explanation.
The hospital loomed before me, its stark facade illuminated by the pale glow of the moon. My heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation as I stepped into the cold, sterile environment. I had been admitted for an unknown ailment that had left me weak and weary, confined to a hospital bed on the 3rd floor. Little did I know that my curiosity would lead me to the darkest depths of horror. It was during one of my restless nights that I first noticed the peculiarities. As I stood in front of the elevator, my gaze fell upon the button for the 4th floor. It was missing. Perhaps it was simply out of order, I reasoned, and dismissed the thought as the elevator doors slid open before me. The next day, my curiosity was reignited when I spotted chains padlocked around the stairs leading to the 4th floor. It was a stark contrast to the otherwise normal hospital environment. My interest in the paranormal had always been a source of fascination, and now, with the tantalizing mystery of the 4th floor, my curiosity consumed me. I decided to inquire about it during one of my conversations with the nurses. Nurse Johnson, a kind and soft-spoken woman, was assigned to my floor that evening. I approached her, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Nurse Johnson," I began, I couldn't help but notice that the 4th floor seems to be off-limits. "Why is that?" Nurse Johnson's expression flickered briefly, a shadow passing over her features. She hesitated before answering, her voice barely a whisper. "There are rumors, you know," she said, avoiding my gaze. "Rumors that the 4th floor is haunted. But I don't believe in such things." My mind raced with a flurry of emotions. Haunted? The idea both thrilled and unnerved me. I knew I shouldn't entertain such notions, but the allure of the unknown was too strong to resist. As the night settled in and the hospital grew quiet, I found myself unable to shake the thought of the fourth floor from my mind. Everyone around me was asleep, the halls dimly lit by the soft glow of the hallway lights. My heart pounded as I slipped out of my room and made my way to the chained stairwell leading to the forbidden floor. I stood before the chains, my heart in my throat, and carefully assessed the situation. The padlocked chains seemed formidable, an intimidating barrier between me and the mystery that lay above. But the weight of my curiosity propelled me forward. I ducked under the chains. My footsteps echoed through the silent corridor as I climbed, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air grew colder, a creeping sensation of dread settling over me. What I encountered within sent a shockwave of terror through my very being. The fourth floor was a twisted, distorted version of the hospital I had known. The walls were covered in a sickly, decaying substance that oozed down. The air was heavy with an oppressive energy, a malevolence that seemed to seep into my very soul. My footsteps echoed as I ventured further into the nightmarish realm. Shadows danced along the walls, shapes that twisted and contorted in unnatural ways. Whispering voices filled the air, their words unintelligible yet dripping with malice. As I reached the end of the corridor, the voices intensified, their chilling words growing louder. Panic clawed at my chest, urging me to leave, but as I turned to escape, a scene of pure terror unfolded before me. A wheelchair stood in the middle of the corridor, blocking my path. My breath caught in my throat as the chair began to move, its wheels squeaking eerily against the floor. Heart pounding, I frantically looked for an escape route and dashed into the nearest room, slamming the door shut behind me. The room was dimly lit. And then I saw it, an unsettling human figure huddled in the corner, its eyes fixed on me. The figure emitted a shrill, inhuman screech that reverberated through the room. My heart raced, and every instinct screamed at me to flee. Rounding the wheelchair stopped in front of the door, I found myself back in the corridor, the figure still screeching behind me. I started running with all my might towards the exit. I burst back onto the third floor, my breath coming in panicked gasps. Nurse Johnson was waiting, her eyes wide with concern. "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. I couldn't find the words to describe the horror I had witnessed. Instead, I simply shook my head, tears streaming down my face. Nurse Johnson helped me back to my room, her touch a comforting anchor in the midst of the terror that had consumed me. From that night on, I was haunted by the memories of the fourth floor. The hospital seemed to hold a sinister secret, a darkness that should have remained locked away. The sterile hospital room was a realm of antiseptic white, its bright lights casting harsh shadows as I stood over the operating table. My hands, gloved and trembling, held the scalpel with a weight that was more than just the cold steel. The patient before me, Mr. Thomas, lay unconscious, his life hanging in the balance. I had always been a confident surgeon, but that day, fear gnawed at the edges of my resolve. Mr. Thomas had a rare condition, and this surgery was my only chance to save him. As I made the first incision, the room seemed to hold its breath. Hours passed in a haze of tension and sweat. The procedure was delicate, fraught with uncertainty. I could feel the eyes of my team on me, their trust in my skills wavering as time stretched on. My hands moved with precision, but doubt lingered in the back of my mind. And then, it happened, a mistake that would haunt me for the rest of my days. My scalpel slipped, a tiny, imperceptible error. But in the world of surgery, the smallest misstep can have catastrophic consequences. A gush of blood, a sudden drop in vital signs, and the room erupted into chaos. My heart pounded as I fought to rectify my mistake, but it was too late. Mr. Thomas slipped away, a victim of my error. The room fell into a chilling silence, broken only by the sobs of my team. I left the operating room that day a broken man, my career in tatters, my reputation shattered. The guilt weighed on me like a stone, crushing me with every step I took. Weeks turned into months, and my life spiraled into a pit of despair. The memory of Mr. Thomas haunted my every waking moment. But then, the nightmares began, vivid, torturous dreams of him, standing at the foot of my bed, his eyes filled with anger and accusation. I told myself it was just my guilt, my conscience tormenting me. But the dreams grew more vivid, more terrifying. Mr. Thomas's voice echoed in my head, a sinister whisper in the dead of night. One evening, as I sat alone in my dimly lit living room, the temperature in the room plunged. I shivered, my breath forming frosty clouds in the air. And then, I saw him, the apparition of Mr. Thomas, standing before me, his eyes burning with a malevolent rage. I gasped, stumbling back, my heart pounding in my chest. His ghostly form reached out, his fingers like icy daggers as they closed around my throat. I choked, struggling for breath, my vision darkening as his vengeance consumed me. But then, as quickly as he had appeared, Mr. Thomas was gone, leaving me gasping for air, my throat raw and bruised. I knew then that he was no ordinary spirit. He had become something darker, something more powerful, a vengeful force that would stop at nothing to make me pay for my mistake. Terrified and desperate, I began researching the paranormal, seeking a way to appease Mr. Thomas's restless soul. But with each attempt, his anger grew, his manifestations more violent. It was clear that he wanted only one thing, my life, to balance the scales of justice in the most brutal way imaginable. I became a recluse, barricading myself in my home. And so, I live in perpetual fear, knowing that my life could end at any moment, that the surgeon who had made one fatal mistake would ultimately pay the ultimate price at the hands of the vengeful spirit I had unwittingly created.